Before we dive into this, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and comment if you think you could survive inside Angola Prison, because what you're about to hear isn't for the faint of heart. The air inside Louisiana's infamous Angola Prison was thick with tension, heavy enough to taste. Concrete walls, taller than most buildings, stretched endlessly under razor-wire fences, their shadows casting jagged lines across the yard. It was a sweltering summer day, the kind where even hardened inmates moved slower, drenched in sweat and suspicion. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared anyone for what happened that morning. In the middle of the yard, a group of inmates stood, motionless, like statues carved from defiance. Guards circled nervously, their radios crackling with unease, because these men had been ordered to betray a fellow prisoner or face brutal punishment. Yet, instead of folding, the inmates refused. No whispers, no deals, just cold, unblinking refusal. The first shout came from the tower. "Move." Now, the guard's voice echoed like a gunshot against the walls. The men didn't flinch. The tension was electric, a current running straight through the chain-link fences. Around them, the rest of the yard fell silent. Even the crows perched atop the towers seemed to hesitate mid-flight. Inside the walls, whispers of "they won't break" had already spread like wildfire. Everyone knew what happened when someone refused. There were beatings. There were transfers to solitary cells so small you could count each brick. And in some cases, there were disappearances. But these men weren't just any prisoners. Each had earned a reputation, not one of mindless violence, but of an ironclad loyalty and a code that couldn't be bought or intimidated. Someone had thrown a tray, sending a metallic ring bouncing across the floor. In that instant, the yard erupted into chaos. Guards shouted, prisoners scrambled, and Carter's group stood firm, unshaken amid the madness, an island of defiance. The yard became a powder keg, every movement a potential spark. Someone whispered, "They're crazy. No one survives defying the system like this." But Carter just stared straight ahead, lips pressed together, jaw set, eyes daring the world to test him. And then, the unthinkable happened. The prison sirens screamed, a harsh wail that cut through the noise like a knife. The massive gates slammed shut with a thundering finality. Guards were scrambling toward the towers, radios blasting urgent commands, and the entire prison seemed to hold its breath. Carter and his group were suddenly surrounded, trapped in the center of the yard with nowhere to go. But instead of fear, something else was visible in their eyes: calm, determination. And in that brief moment, every prisoner watching knew that what would happen next could change the rules of survival inside Angola forever. And then, just as the guards readied their batons and the shouting reached a fever pitch, Carter made a move that no one expected, a step that would either get him and his companions killed or cement their names in prison legend. What he did next shocked the prison to its core. But before we get to that, we need to go back to the events that led a group of men to the brink of defiance, where breaking was not an option. To understand why Carter and his group refused to break that day, you need to go back years, decades, in some cases, to when Angola was less a prison and more a cage of nightmares. Originally a plantation, its history was soaked in blood and labor, and the men inside carried the weight of that legacy in every step, every scar, every hardened gaze. Carter hadn't been born into this life. He had chosen it. Or perhaps fate had chosen it for him. As a teenager, he was caught in a petty theft that escalated far beyond his control. By the age of 19, he was already on the radar of the Louisiana Department of Corrections. But unlike most, Carter learned quickly, survival wasn't about hiding or pleading. It was about understanding the invisible rules of the prison, the unspoken hierarchy, and the dangerous politics that kept a man alive. He found allies early on, men who had survived similar storms. Among them was Marcus, a wiry man with eyes that missed nothing, known for thinking 3 moves ahead in every confrontation. Then there was Darnell, whose calm voice and steady hands had earned him a reputation as someone you could trust with your life, even if the guard towers were pointing straight at you. Together, they formed a brotherhood, bound not by blood, but by necessity and trust. Life inside Angola was brutal. Food fights escalated into riots, minor disagreements could erupt into full-blown brawls, and the constant threat of snitches meant loyalty was currency more valuable than any commissary dollar. Carter and his group had been tested time and again. Once, a gang had cornered them in the laundry hall, knives gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Instead of panicking, they used the environment, hot steam, stacked carts, and even the echoing walls, to turn the tide, surviving what would have killed many. It wasn't just the gangs or guards that shaped them. It was the psychological warfare, the slow grinding of hope. Guards would exploit weaknesses, planting whispers of betrayal, dangling favors or reduced sentences if one would turn on the others. Most men would break under that pressure, confessing lies, implicating friends, just to gain a few months out of solitary or avoid a beating. Carter and his brothers had seen too many men fall into that trap. But the defining moment, the one that cemented their refusal to bow, came during a lockdown 2 years prior. A newer inmate, desperate and cornered, had been forced to make a choice: inform on a fellow prisoner or be sent to a cell that no man returned from without permanent scars. The man broke, and the consequences were catastrophic. His so-called friends turned against him instantly. Guards exploited the betrayal, creating chaos that spread through the entire cell block. From that day forward, Carter and his crew swore that no one among them would ever betray another. It wasn't naive. It was survival, coated in steel and blood. They called it the Unbreakable Pact, a promise that if one was threatened, all would stand, regardless of cost. This wasn't just rebellion. It was their insurance against the darkest corners of Angola, where trust was a weapon as sharp as any blade. Over time, the group grew to include other inmates who had nowhere else to turn. Some were former gang leaders. Others had survived stabbings or years in solitary confinement. All of them shared one thing: a refusal to let fear dictate their actions. Together, they were a force the prison hadn't reckoned with. That morning in the yard, the day of the standoff, it wasn't the first time Carter had faced the wrath of Angola's guards. But it was the first time he, Marcus, Darnell, and their brothers were ordered to betray someone whose life hung in the balance. And unlike past confrontations, this was different. The stakes were higher, the tension thicker, and the consequences more lethal. The story that led them to this moment wasn't built in hours or days. It was forged in years of calculated risks, careful observation, and unshakable loyalty. And as the yard fell silent and the gates thundered shut behind them, every man watching knew one truth: this wasn't just a refusal to obey. It was a challenge to the system itself. What no one knew, least of all the guards, was that Carter had already planned his next move, a move that would either make them legends or send them straight to the worst cells Angola had to offer. And that move was coming faster than anyone could anticipate. The sun beat down on Angola's yard, glinting off the fences like a warning. Guards moved nervously along the perimeter, their radios crackling, eyes darting into every shadow. But in the middle of it all, Carter and his men moved like predators, blending into the environment, calm, calculated, unshakable. The rest of the yard was frozen, the world on pause. Inmates in orange jumpsuits whispered, some craning their necks to watch, others daring not to look. Rumors traveled faster than guards could react. They won't break. You don't survive like that unless you're untouchable. Every whisper stoked fear, admiration, or jealousy. The story of defiance was spreading. Inside the warden's office, the tension was just as high. Security cameras tracked every move, but Carter and his men were no ordinary prisoners. They knew the surveillance angles. They anticipated the guards' commands. It was a psychological chess game, and they were 3 moves ahead. The standoff began subtly. A guard shouted for Carter to step forward. Carter didn't move. Another guard approached, baton raised. Marcus, beside Carter, shifted slightly, a small movement signaling readiness, not aggression. The guards misread it. mistaking caution for submission. They were wrong. The yard had become a powder keg. Angola's infamous code of silence had rarely been tested like this. Inside the group, there was no hesitation. Darnell scanned the yard, noting potential allies and threats. Carter whispered a single word. Now. It wasn't a command to attack, but a signal. Each man adjusted slightly, creating a defensive formation so subtle it was almost invisible, but ruthlessly effective. The guards, overconfident, began to close in, their voices rising, batons shaking. Quiet cheers and curses came from the sidelines. The yard itself seemed alive, holding its breath. Suddenly, a tray clattered to the floor in the mess hall, shattering the fragile calm. The guards turned, distracted. Carter used that single moment to shift position, moving closer to the center of the yard. Every step was precise. They had rehearsed this mentally for years. Survival was strategy, not chance. An officer barked a warning. Step aside now, or we open fire with non-lethal rounds. The inmates froze. Some whispered prayers. Others clenched their fists, knowing history was unfolding. In that frozen moment, time stretched. Carter's eyes met the officer's. Fear, authority, and defiance collided. The officer expected panic. Carter gave him none. Instead, he tilted his head, as if daring them to act. Then, a loud, metallic clang echoed. This time, it was intentional. Carter had set a chain reaction into motion, using a nearby metal cart to create a barrier, giving the illusion of more men moving than there actually were. The guards froze, confused. Some shouted for backup, others hesitated. Every second mattered. Carter's group had the advantage, but only if they maintained control. One wrong move, and it would all spiral into disaster. They moved like shadows, calm in the chaos, knowing that breaking, even for a second, could cost them everything. And in that moment, something unimaginable began to unfold. From the back of the yard, a figure emerged, running, not toward them, but straight into the heart of the chaos. No one could predict who it was or what they intended. The tension snapped like a wire. Every eye followed the figure, hearts pounding. The yard was no longer just a prison. It was a battlefield of nerves, loyalty, and survival. And what happened next would push Carter and his group to the edge, testing everything they believed about courage, trust, and the true cost of defiance. The figure barreled through the chaos, sweat flying, feet pounding against concrete, a blur of desperation and determination. Guards shouted orders, but the sheer audacity of Carter's group had frozen them in place long enough for the newcomer to reach the center of the yard. Carter's eyes narrowed. He recognized the man immediately. It was Lewis, a prisoner known for his cunning and unpredictability, a man who had survived stabbings and gang reprisals that would have ended most lives. Lewis didn't speak. He simply raised a fist, signaling something only the group could understand. The guards hesitated. They had no idea what was about to unfold. Carter and Marcus exchanged a glance. Darnell's jaw clenched. The yard had shifted from a simple standoff to a strategic battlefield, and every move now carried the weight of life and death. Then, without warning, Carter lunged, not at a guard, but toward a metal cart stacked with trays. He yanked it over, creating a barricade. The sound of metal crashing against concrete echoed through the yard, followed by a chorus of shouts. The guards reacted instinctively, swinging batons, but the momentum had already shifted. Carter's group moved like a single organism, synchronized in every step. The yard erupted. Inmates shouted, some cheering, some terrified. Guards tried to regain control, but Carter's men anticipated every move. Marcus intercepted one officer advancing too close, using a combination of leverage and force that didn't rely on raw violence. Every action calculated, precise, effective. In the chaos, Darnell grabbed Lewis and whispered instructions. It was a plan only they could execute, something rehearsed in whispered conversations and mental drills over months, maybe years. The figure at the mess hall, another ally, had blocked another approach. Carter's group wasn't just surviving. They were orchestrating the standoff. Suddenly, a gunshot-like sound rang out. Panic gripped the yard. But it wasn't a real gun. It was a canister of pepper spray accidentally discharged by a guard trying to assert control. The smoke spread quickly, stinging eyes, causing men to cough and stumble. Visibility dropped. Guards were disoriented. In that split second, Carter made his move. He stepped forward, voice calm but firm. You want obedience? You'll have to take it from us, he said, words cutting through the chaos like a blade. The guards faltered, unsure how to respond to a man standing unshaken in the middle of a yard full of men ready to defend him. But the real shock came when Lewis, the newcomer, sprinted past the guards and into the narrow corridor leading to the control room. He wasn't running blindly. He was executing the final piece of their plan. The control room held the keys to the gates. If they could get there, they could dictate the terms of the standoff. The guards finally realized what was happening. Shouts turned into frantic commands. Radios crackled with panic. Some ran toward the corridor. Others tried to contain the yard. But Carter's group was already anticipating every move, covering each other with disciplined precision. For the first time, the inmates around the yard dared to cheer, a sound of solidarity and disbelief. "They're actually doing it," someone whispered. "They're taking control." Fear and awe rippled through the prison. And then came the moment no one saw coming. Carter climbed onto the overturned metal cart, towering over the yard, and raised his voice. "We're not breaking. Not today. Not ever." His words hit like thunder, reverberating against the walls. In that instant, something shifted, not just the yard, but the psyche of everyone watching. Defiance had become contagious. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to escalate or retreat. Carter's group held the advantage, the moral high ground, and the psychological upper hand. But the most dangerous moment was still ahead. The warden had been alerted, and he was moving toward the yard with reinforcements. Full-scale lockdowns, armed intervention, and punishment awaited. Carter knew it. Marcus knew it. Darnell knew it. Yet none of them flinched. Every second now was a test of nerve, strategy, and loyalty. The yard had become a living battlefield of survival instincts, trust, and sheer willpower. And then, just as the warden's shadow fell over the yard, Carter made a move that would change everything. A single action that stunned everyone and forced both inmates and guards to stop, reevaluate, and question the rules they had lived by for decades. It was a move that no one could have predicted, and it set the stage for the most dangerous, tense, and defining moments of the Angola prison saga. By mid-afternoon, the yard had become a tense war zone, alive with fear, adrenaline, and anticipation. Guards moved like shadows, hesitant yet ready to strike. Every inmate watched Carter and his group, some cheering silently, some shaking with anxiety. But one presence loomed larger than any guard or prisoner, the warden himself. Warden Hargrove was a man of calculated authority. Years in Angola had sharpened him into someone who could read a man before he even spoke. Yet, as he approached the yard, even he felt the tension bite at his nerves. He had seen rebellions before, but nothing like this. A group of inmates standing unshaken, refusing to obey, turning defiance into performance art. "Step down, Carter," the warden barked, his voice carrying over the yard like a cannon shot. "This ends now. You will comply, or you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Carter didn't flinch. His eyes met Hargrove's, unyielding, unwavering. "We don't comply. Not today. Not ever," he replied, his voice carrying a strange calm power that silenced the yard. The guards tensed, batons raised, ready to force compliance. But the warden paused, studying Carter. Something about the man's presence, his control, his courage, made the warden hesitate. Carter wasn't just resisting. He was demonstrating that fear could be a weapon used against those who wielded authority recklessly. And then it happened. Lewis, the figure who had sprinted to the control room earlier, reappeared, a bundle of keys in hand. The gates, massive, steel behemoths, clanged open slowly, deliberately. The prisoners in the yard gasped. Guards scrambled to regain control, shouting orders that no one could hear over the roar of disbelief. Carter's group took strategic positions near the gates, controlling movement, ensuring no chaos could spiral further. But the warden wasn't about to back down. Reinforcements flooded the yard from side corridors, their numbers overwhelming. Yet even with numbers on his side, Hargrove felt uneasy. These men weren't just breaking the rules, they were rewriting them in real time, daring the system itself to respond. A standoff unlike any Angola had ever seen unfolded. Every footstep, every shout, every calculated glance carried a threat of violence or revelation. And then came the first act of betrayal. Not from Carter, not from Marcus or Darnell, but from a newer inmate, scared, desperate, trying to leverage the chaos for his own safety. He stepped toward the guards, shouting, They're going to kill us all if we don't. It was the moment Carter had anticipated. He didn't panic. Instead, he moved swiftly, positioning himself between the man and the guards. One firm word, one controlled gesture, and the would-be traitor froze. Carter's authority wasn't enforced by force alone. It was backed by respect, fear, and the unbreakable pact he had forged with his group. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat poured, hearts pounded, and the heat of the Louisiana sun pressed down like a physical weight. And then, as if the tension itself had grown too heavy to bear, a sound split the air, a single, deafening clap of thunder, although the skies above were clear. Prisoners flinched, guards cursed, and Carter's eyes followed the movement near the perimeter. Reinforcements from the warden's office had brought riot shields, prepared to push through the yard. But Carter's group had anticipated this, funneling movement in predictable paths, blocking access with overturned carts and strategic positioning. The standoff had evolved into a psychological battlefield where intellect and courage were as deadly as weapons. Then, at the height of chaos, Carter made his boldest move yet. He didn't attack. He didn't retreat. He raised his voice above the shouts, above the chaos, above the fear. "This is our stand," he shouted. "We live by the code of loyalty, and no threat will make us break." Every prisoner in the yard felt it. A wave of awe, disbelief, and fear rippled through them. Guards froze. Even the warden hesitated, realizing that brute force alone wouldn't end this standoff. Carter's defiance had become a force larger than the prison itself, a message that loyalty and courage could bend even the iron rules of Angola. And just when it seemed the yard might descend into full-blown violence, a single unexpected act, by someone the prison never suspected, shifted everything. It wasn't Carter. It wasn't Marcus. It wasn't Darnell. It was a quiet, unassuming figure, hidden among the crowd, who made a choice that would decide the outcome of the day and leave the entire prison questioning the cost of betrayal, trust, and tension courage. Simmered in the yard, a thick, palpable thing you could almost taste. Every inmate was a statue, every guard a coiled spring, and right in the middle of it all, Carter's crew stood, frozen in the eye of the storm. But the real game-changer wasn't in the spotlight. It was a ghost, a man no one ever noticed, and he was about to flip the entire board. His name was Jenkins, a lifer, a man who'd mastered the art of being invisible. For years, he'd been part of the prison's scenery, a shadow that never made a sound. Nobody, and I mean nobody, expected him to do anything. But in that one, heart-stopping moment, he made a decision that would echo through the halls of Angola for decades to come. He moved with a quiet purpose, slipping through a tight gap near the perimeter fence. It was a blind spot, one he'd probably mapped out years ago. His target, a security panel that controlled the inner gates. Sweat poured down his face, his heart beating like a drum against his ribs, but his hands were rock steady. He'd rehearsed this in his mind 1,000 times. With a few swift, precise movements, he bypassed the lock. A sharp, metallic click cut through the tense silence of the yard. It was a sound that changed everything. Slowly, almost painfully, the inner gates began to swing open. Just like that, Carter's group had the tactical advantage they'd been praying for. But it came with a colossal risk. If the guards caught on before the plan was fully in motion, it was game over. Immediate, brutal disaster. Carter didn't miss a beat. The moment he saw the gates move, he gave a subtle signal to Marcus and Darnell. From this point on, every single step mattered. They moved like phantoms, their focus so sharp it could cut glass. Their job was to secure that newly opened path, to create a safe channel, all while keeping the rest of the volatile yard under control. The inmates around them felt the shift in the air. You could see it in their eyes. Some let out quiet cheers. Others just held their breath, knowing that one wrong move could bring the whole thing crashing down in a wave of violence. The warden, perched in his watchtower, saw the gates opening and completely lost it. He was screaming orders, his voice cracking with fury, his authority crumbling under the sheer unpredictability of it all. Reinforcements swarmed into the yard, a wave of black uniforms, raised shields, and ready batons. They were coming in hard and fast. But Carter's crew had anticipated this. They were always 2 steps ahead. Every guard that charged forward found their path blocked, was cleverly rerouted, or got caught up in a feint designed to neutralize them without escalating to lethal force. It was a beautiful, dangerous dance of strategy and control. And then, something truly impossible happened. Lewis, who was still at the very center of the yard, scrambled onto a maintenance cart. He stood tall, raised his arms, and his voice boomed across the chaos, silencing guards and inmates alike. "This ends today," he yelled. "Not by fear, not by force, but by loyalty." It wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration of war and a warning. Any guard who tried to force their way through would be met with a coordinated, precise, and relentless response from men who had nothing left to lose. The yard exploded. It was a strange mix of awe, disbelief, and a surge of adrenaline. In that single, electrifying moment, the first blow was struck. And it wasn't with a fist or a baton, but with perception. The guards finally realized their fatal mistake. They had underestimated these men. They thought fear was the ultimate weapon, that they could break them with threats and punishment. They were dead wrong. Carter's group, now backed by the unspoken allegiance of hundreds of other inmates, pressed their psychological advantage. They moved with purpose, strategically, not recklessly. They created the illusion of total chaos while maintaining absolute control over every key point in the yard. The guards' radios crackled with panic. Orders were being shouted, overlapping, creating confusion. The warden's reinforcements were completely stymied, blocked by makeshift barricades, quick thinking, and the unbreakable unity of prisoners who refused to turn on each other. Then came the defining moment. The point where raw courage and defiance slammed head-on into the wall of authority. A single mistake from a guard, one overzealous swing of a baton, could have ignited a full-blown riot that would have burned the entire prison to the ground. But Carter, Marcus, Darnell, and the others, they stayed cool. Their movements were deliberate, their decisions were surgical. As the minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, the warden began to understand a terrifying new reality. Brute force wasn't going to win this. Every attempt to intimidate, every push to regain control, was met with a wall of coordination, loyalty, and sheer mental fortitude. Angola had never, ever seen anything like this. The standoff reached its absolute peak. Carter climbed onto an overturned cart, standing tall, his eyes sweeping across the yard, locking gazes with every guard and every inmate. Sweat streamed down his face, his muscles were coiled tight, but his voice was calm, carrying a weight of authority that silenced the storm around him. "We don't break," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "You can try, but we stand as one. Today, loyalty wins." A profound silence fell over the yard. It was as if the entire prison held its breath in that one tense, drawn-out moment. Even the warden, a man known for his ruthless pragmatism, felt the crushing weight of it. Carter's defiance wasn't reckless. It was calculated, it was unwavering, and it was utterly impossible to ignore. And just when it felt like the yard was about to snap, a sudden movement from the shadows changed the game once more. A guard, just a regular officer, stepped forward. He lowered his baton. You could see the conflict in his eyes, the indecision. Should he intervene, or should he back down? That single, small action signaled a shift that no one could have predicted. The tide was turning. The warden's grip on control was slipping, cracking under the pressure. The unbreakable pact of Carter's group, forged in the fires of the worst prison in the country, was about to become a legend. Their story was being written, right there, in the dust and tension of the Angola yard. Thanks for watching. If you want to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. The air in Angola's yard was so thick with tension, you could almost taste it. Every prisoner, every guard, every inch of concrete and steel seemed to vibrate, ready to snap. Carter's group stood firm, a wall of defiance in the face of absolute power. The gates, swung open by Jenkins' silent act of courage, gave them a sliver of hope, a tiny but critical edge. The warden's reinforcements moved forward, their boots scuffing the ground, but something was different. They were cautious, hesitant. They were starting to realize that brute force wasn't going to break this wall of loyalty. It was a stalemate, a powder keg waiting for a spark. And then, the moment that would define everything. Carter stepped down from the overturned cart he'd been standing on. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the center of the yard. His footsteps echoed in the sudden quiet. The guards clutched their batons, knuckles white, but a seed of doubt had been planted in their ranks. Carter's voice cut through the silence, not loud, but clear, steady, and impossible to ignore. "This ends on our terms," he said. "Not because we fear, not because we hate, but because we stand together. Loyalty is stronger than fear. For a single, breathless heartbeat, the entire yard went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. And then it happened. An officer, the same one who'd been closest to Carter's group when the standoff began, slowly lowered his baton. His eyes, fixed on Carter, held a strange mixture of fear, respect, and a dawning realization. He couldn't break them. No one could. The standoff, which had been teetering on the brink of a bloodbath, ended not with a crash of violence, but with a quiet, grudging acknowledgement. The warden, a man accustomed to absolute control, took a step back. He raised his hand, signaling his reinforcements to halt. He was a smart man, and he knew that pushing this any further would be a disaster. He had lost this round. Carter and his brothers had done the impossible. They had refused an order, defied the system, and survived. They had sent a message that would echo through the stone and steel of Angola for decades to come. Some things, like loyalty, courage, and honor among men, could never be broken. As Carter and his group stood tall, the prisoners watching from the sidelines erupted in a wave of subdued celebration. It wasn't loud cheering, but a ripple of whispers, of murmurs of admiration. Carter's group moved together as one, not as beaten-down inmates or fugitives, but as legends. They had stared into the abyss of Angola's wrath and walked away with something far more valuable than survival. They had earned respect, the rarest and most precious currency in a place built entirely on fear. In the days that followed, the story of Carter, Marcus, Darnell, and their unbreakable pact spread like wildfire through the prison. Guards who had witnessed the standoff, shaken by what they saw, shared the story in hushed tones. New inmates, fresh and terrified, were told the tale as a warning and a lesson. You might survive Angola, but never, ever underestimate loyalty. Some men will never break. The prison continued its relentless, soul-crushing grind, day in and day out. But the legend of that day remained, a flickering candle in the darkness, a constant reminder that courage and unity could challenge even the most brutal, unfeeling systems. Carter's group hadn't just refused an order. They had done something much more profound. They had redefined what it meant to stand together in a place specifically designed to strip men of their hope, their humanity, and their connections to one another. Angola had its prisoners, its rules, its iron bars. But for one unforgettable day, a handful of men reminded everyone inside those walls that defiance, when fueled by loyalty and courage, could move mountains, or at least shake the very foundations of a prison built on fear. If you thought Carter and his brothers were just ordinary prisoners, think again. Their story is a powerful testament that even in the darkest, most hopeless places, loyalty, courage, and unity can rewrite the rules. They showed the world that the human spirit has a breaking point, but for some, that point is never reached. So, if their story blew you away, smash that like button. Make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss another shocking true crime story like this one. And I want to know what you think in the comments below. What would you do if you were trapped in Angola that day? Would you break, or would you stand unshaken like Carter? Share this story with your friends and let the world know. Some men are truly unbreakable. Thanks for watching.